Good evening. Good to have you back again. Glad you're here. Wednesday night service. Thank you for our visitors being with us. Glad you're here. Tonight we're going to continue on the Sermon on the Mount, where we're going to be covering tonight and for the next several weeks. We'll be looking at that. We'll get into a word of prayer, and Bill Pennington, would you lead some prayer? So far, what we looked at is Christ is beginning to give the proper understanding of a lot of the Ten Commandments. He talked about there, thou shalt not kill, proper understanding. And of course, the Jewish individuals thought, as long as I don't kill somebody, I'm okay. I can hate them, and that'll be all right. But Christ gave the understanding that means hate as well. Because if you hate a person, then you're taking one more step toward the murder of that individual. So thou shalt not kill included hate. He talked about thou shalt not commit adultery. And the Jewish individual thought, well, as long as I don't commit the very act, then I'm okay with God. But Christ took it a step further and said, no, it's also about that lust. You got to keep that under control. You don't need to have that in your life, because if you take that next step of lust, then the next step is adultery. So he cleared up the thought about that as well. So now in chapter 5, verse 33 through 37, he's talking about taking an oath or a vow. He says, and again you have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is the footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Now, Christ is not saying here that it's wrong to take an oath. He's not saying it's wrong to take a vow. But what he is condemning here is using God's name or something similar in your vow or oath that you're taking in order to try to convince people you're telling the truth. Don't do that, he says. Now, the thing about the Jewish people, they would take all kind of oaths. And they was this one and that one. But they would never use God's name in an oath, because that was wrong. And that's where Christ is coming from here. They would not use the name of God. They would not say, so help me God. They wouldn't do that. They thought that was a sin to do that. But it didn't bother them to say, I swear by heaven, or I swear by the throne of God, or I take an oath about the earth or Jerusalem or something like that, or even their own life. It didn't bother them to do that, because to them that was a loophole. If you were to be making a deal with somebody and I swear this is the truth, so help me heaven, or so help me Jerusalem. They could say that and still think, well, I haven't told a lie because I didn't use God's name in this. Now, if you didn't know that, let's say you go into making a deal with this Jewish individual, and he says, I raise my right hand, I swear by heaven that this is the truth. And you think, well, that's a pretty good thing to go with there. But then again, you need to know how the Jews looked at that. Only thing that they had to keep their word on is if God's name was in there, but yet they wouldn't use God's name in such an oath. So therefore, you may have a big deal with this individual, and all of a sudden it falls through, And you go to him and you say, I thought you made an oath here on heaven or about Jerusalem, the great city. And they say, oh, that doesn't matter. That doesn't count. But what Christ is telling here is when you let your yes be yes and your no be no, you don't need to say anything or no, to swear or to make an oath by using any name to make it more believable. You don't need to do that. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. And when one says, so help me God, and they're calling on God as a witness. If you don't believe me, just go ask God. How are we going to do that? Well, we can't do it. We can't go and, God, is this person telling the truth? And God speaks down and he says, yes, that person's telling the truth. Well, we can't do that. But sometimes that is said, and hopefully when a person raises their right hand, and in some cases, and they sort of much removed it today, when a person says, so help me God, well, they're saying, just ask God. He knows I'm telling the truth. Well, that person may or may not really be telling the truth today. What I found out is when a person uses more words to try to convince you that they're telling the truth, the odds are they're probably telling a lie. People may say, God is my witness. Now, be careful of that one, because they're probably telling a lie. And some have said, on my mother's grave. I don't know what that means. I never looked it up. I swear on my mother's grave, I'm telling the truth. I don't know where it comes from or anything about it, but some people will say it. But when they begin to add words, instead of just saying yes or no, look out. They're probably trying to convince you that they're telling the truth by using words, inserting God's name, or something very similar to it, to try to convince you they're telling the truth. So the Lord here is saying to these Jewish individuals, really anybody that's listening to them, you just tell the truth. Someone asks you a question, yes or no. Tell the truth. You don't need to use all these words in order to try to convince people that you are trying to make it truthful. Now, there's nothing wrong with making a vow. There's nothing wrong if you go to court and they were to ask you to raise your hand and do you swear, so help you God? There's nothing wrong with that. In Ecclesiastes 5, 4, and 5, we find it taking place. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not to pay. So when you make an agreement and you want to put God's name in there, you better make sure you're going to go through with that and you're doing what is right, because God says it's better not to make a vow and you know you're going to break it. And sometimes people will do that. They know right up front that they're not going to keep their word. And they're trying to convince you, and like a snake in the grass or something like that, convince you of that. And again, that's why in today's court system, and you got to have a contract with everything, and all these different specifications, and you sign 100 papers, and again, it's because people will not say yes or no. They will not keep their word, and that has to be done. So, I would think David. I didn't look at it, but King David is always, Jerusalem is considered the city of David. So I would think it would be him. Solomon, or it could be Solomon. I would think David. He's one they revered greatly. So Christ sort of sets it up there about how to make a vow, what to do, what not to do. If we go back to 33 through 37 again, he talks in verse 36, nor shall you swear by your head. That means your life. To begin with, what he's saying here, our life belongs to God. He is our creator. We belong to him. So therefore, I can't say my life, it's my life, because it belongs to God. If you go and borrow something from somebody and you're making a deal with them, and you say, if I don't go through with this deal, you can have this item right here, but it's not yours to give away. Well, it's not our life to give away. Our life belongs to God. We're created in his image. It's what we have. And we cannot make one hair white or black, anything of that nature. We are truly belonging to God. So we can't use our life even. But if a person would, that's pretty serious. A person want to swear by their life, and all of a sudden that's caught telling a lie. I wouldn't want to tell a lie, my life based on that, but the Lord says you can't do that because our life belongs to the Lord on that. So we want to be known for telling the truth. We want to be known for honesty. We don't want to be known for, lying and dishonesty. And people say, well, you better watch out for him. We don't want to be known for that. Next, 38 and 39. But you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. This is called the law of retaliation. If somebody, or if you hurt somebody, well, they could, in a legal sense, retaliate. If you took out their eye, they could take your eye. If you knocked out a tooth, they could take your tooth. And the Jewish law had it, if the person that you took their eye out, if they only had one eye, let's say they were blind in one eye and you took the good eye out, well, then they could take both of your eyes because you made that person blind. Now you are to be blind as well. So the Jewish law took it a step further on that. But the thing about retaliation, what the Lord is getting across here, there's never enough. If a person hurts you, and you retaliate, you want to hurt them a little bit more. Well, then they want to hurt you a little bit more. And it's back and forth, and there's never enough. There's never enough. You can never be satisfied. And the Pharisees taught retaliation. Don't wait for the judge. Don't carry this to court. Go ahead and do it right now. And that's what they taught. And here the Lord is saying, don't do that. You're not to do that. And in verse 39, where he says, do not resist an evil person, what the meaning there is, do not be looking for ways of revenge. Don't do that. Christ said it was going to happen. If we were to look back in chapter 5, 10 through 12, he said there's going to be persecution. It's going to happen. And when he talks about if he slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other one to him, what he's meaning there is expect it to happen again. If you were mistreated one time, you think that's the only time you're ever going to be mistreated? Get ready, it's going to happen again. And that's where he's coming from here. If he slaps you on the right cheek, get ready. He's going to get you on the left one as well. He's not talking, he doesn't mean we can't defend ourselves. We can certainly do that. But from the revenge standpoint, he says don't do it. It's better to have forgiveness. It's better to try to have peace in this conflict, because the revenge factor will not work. It will never end. There will always be something. But protect yourself. But that's where the Jews took this. Don't take it to court. You take care of it yourself. And it'll never end. That's what will happen. Somebody will die. Then there goes, thou shalt not kill, jumps in there. Then where do you go with that? More problems. 40 through 42. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. So somebody's wanting to sue you. He's wanting to take your tunic, which was the inner clothing. They had the cloak was the outer clothing, the big coat. The tunic was the inner clothing that would be next to the body. If they want to take your tunic, go to them and try to work this thing out. Give them your cloak. Give them your big coat. And this big coat was pretty valuable. That was used for covering at night when you slept. So he said, give them that as well. Do what you can to work this thing out. Because if you don't, you may have problems. Now, if you go back to verse 25, he talks there about if you need to settle a problem with somebody very quickly. Because if he goes to court, he could take every penny you got. So he's wanting you to be a peacemaker. He's wanting you to be one that is trying to have peace with someone. Not always in a skirmish. You show this person, I'm wanting to work this out. I don't want this thing to go any further. Do your best to work it out. And what could be worse? Losing your cloak or losing your soul? Which would be worse? I guess, of course, losing the soul would be worse. But if you have this attitude of revenge, you very well could lose your soul. Who knows what that could lead to? And then in 41 and 42, there's the going the second mile. Again, that's trying to be at peace with others. Again, under the Jews, the Roman oppression, Roman law had it where you had to help them. Even if you didn't want to, you had to help them. If they came to your house and wanted you to carry some goods, you were obliged to carry 1 mile from your house. So you would, the Lord says, go beyond what is required. If he wants a glass of water, give him 2 glasses. Glass of water. Something to eat, give him a to-go bag. Carry it with him, something like that. You're showing you're wanting to be at peace with this individual. You're not wanting to have revenge and only going to do the bare minimum. So be at peace with an individual. There in 42, give him who asks of you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Meaning here, a person who is a beggar, who needs food. Give him what he needs. If you can give it to him, give it to him. And it's better, he says, if you will offer the person, I'll tell you what, I'll loan you some money here, a couple of dollars, and now that will enable you to go and buy your own food. That's better for the individual to give them that, let them go get their own food, hope that they'll pay it back, than it would be for them to come and beg. The begging part, sometimes it hurts a person who's really in need. He doesn't want to beg. He'd rather take a loan and promise to pay it back. That's what he'd rather do than you just give it to him. And that's where the Lord's coming from. He's trying to help that individual out in this way. It doesn't mean everybody that comes to you, you got to give them a loan. You can't do that. It's impossible to do so. But the Pharisees' view was, well, I'm going to do this, I'm doing it to make a profit. If you don't pay me back, you're in trouble. And they're always about the profit thing here. So, but if you don't have it to loan, you can't loan it. Another good rule to follow is if you can't live without it, you don't loan it. Some folks will say, well, I loaned this money and it didn't pay me back and it put me in such a bind. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have given that loan. If you can't live without it, you don't give it out. You don't loan it away, because it may not come back. So remember God who supplies our daily needs that we have. And the Lord here is saying to us, if somebody has a need, let's see if we can't help them in some way. It may be advice as to how to get them out of that situation. Or it may be you give them a couple of dollars, or it may be you can give them something to eat. But just don't turn cold and heartless toward this person. Don't do that. 43 through 45. You have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. He sends rain on the just and on the unjust. The understanding of this verse hinges on the word neighbor. To a Jewish person, a neighbor was another Jewish person. Don't think of neighbor as being just anybody. To a Jewish individual, my neighbor is another person, another Jewish individual. The enemy is anybody that is not a Jewish person. That's how we got to look at this. And because of the way the Jews treated people during this time, and really any time in the biblical times, the people hated them for that. They got a bad name. They were cursed many times because of what they did. They were persecuted because of the way they treated people. So if you're not my brother, my Jewish brother, you can forget about it. I'm going to mistreat you and do harm to you. And that's what they would do. And that's even today, I think, a part of it that goes back into history as to why the Jewish people are hated so much, because they hated everybody else except their own. Except their own. If you remember Luke 10 and verse 29, a lawyer comes to Christ and he asks him a question, what is the greatest commandment? And Christ said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second, he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Emphasis on neighbor. He's telling this lawyer, you love your neighbor as yourself. Well, then the lawyer comes back, and remember, he says to him, well, who is my neighbor? And Christ gives us the parable here of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, 36 and 37. So which of these three do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, he who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Jesus is trying to teach the Jewish people, you show mercy to everybody. You be kind to everybody, not just your own. You be kind to everyone. And that's why he was given this parable here to show, here's a man, the Good Samaritan, who didn't have to show this mercy, helping the man in the ditch who had been robbed and beaten, half dead, left there to die. He didn't have to do that. He showed mercy. The two that passed him by, they should have showed mercy, but they didn't, because whatever reason they may have been given at the time. So we got to understand the Jewish people were greatly hated because of the way they treated people. And if we treat people that way, if we're only kind to other Christians, that's not going to work. We're going to be hated. Not going to work so well. We are to be kind to everyone. And we go back to 43 through 45. He talks in verse 45, look what God does. The sun rises on the evil and the good. The rain on the just and the unjust. God's kind to everyone. His blessings are given to everyone. And he's telling the people here, you need to do the same thing. You be kind to everyone, not just your fellow Christians, but help those who have a need. Be kind. You don't want to be known as somebody who's just mean. You don't want that. That'll come back to hurt you, and you'll be hurt, maybe in a physical way because of it, especially in the hatred that they would have for us. So that commandment that the Lord gives there, really understanding the word neighbor, who the Jews looked at as being a neighbor. And then in 46 through 48, he goes here to say, if you only love those who love you, what reward have you? Again, that's where he's getting with this, who's my neighbor? We're to love all people. We're to do that. Some people can be hard to love, but we don't hate. You may love some more than you do others, but we just don't want to hate. The tax collectors, they love their own. A tax collector being a Jewish individual in most cases. In most cases, they're very dishonest, and the Jews didn't like it because they worked for the Roman government. And they took care of themselves. Tax collectors looked out for one another. And Christ is saying to these listeners here, the Jewish listeners, if all you do is take care of your own brethren, you know better than the tax collector. That's all they're going to do. Be like God. Be complete, perfect, or complete like He is. He sends the rain and the sunshine on all people. Be like Him. Chapter 6. He begins to take aim at some of the actual duties or works of the Pharisees. Verse 1, take heed to do that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by men. Otherwise you will have no reward for your Father in heaven. Therefore, you do a charitable deed, do not sound the trumpet, because you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, they may have the glory of men. But surely I say to you, they have the reward. When you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will Himself reward you openly. In the synagogues and also in the temple, there were two places you were to give. There was one place where they were commanded to give. God said, you give this amount. It was over 30% they had to give. They had to give that amount. Next to it was another chamber that you could put just your donations in to help the poor. You weren't commanded to do so, but if you wanted to, you could. You could go ahead, and that was above and beyond normally what you would give. Now, when he says here, do not sound the trumpet, nowhere in Jewish history do we find any Pharisee blowing a trumpet before he drops the money in. Sometimes we think he's getting ready to blow a horn. Look at me, what I'm about to do here. The trumpet was this container that you would put the money in. And it had a large opening at the top, and it funneled down so that when you put the money in, sometimes you put it in the right way, it would swirl around. It would make a sound of a trumpet. It would sound like that. So those who wanted to draw attention to themselves, they might take that money and just throw it in there, and here it goes, making that sound. And people will be thinking, whoa, they put in a lot of money today. What the Lord is saying here, you go up to that box, that opening, and you put that money in there, and you slowly let it go down, that nobody hears it, that nobody knows, that it doesn't draw the attention that you have just put this money in. Because if all you're wanting to do here is get the attention of somebody, or that's your reward right there. That's all the reward you're going to get. The Lord is not going to reward you in what you're doing. So some of these Pharisees apparently were making a big show out of it. Look what I'm doing. I'm going above and beyond. they would throw it in, it'd make that sound. People would think, well, somebody just put in a big amount. And they'd look up and there's that person. Just take it in a very secretive way, silent way. Put it in. And then in verse 5 through 8, he talks about prayer. How some of the Pharisees, they love to pray. They love to be heard in their prayer. They would 3 times a day in the synagogue, they would pray, and people would come up there and they would listen to the prayers, or maybe they had prayer requests. Who knows what they wanted? But they would pray. But some of these Pharisees here, they would do so just to be noticed. Maybe they use big words. They have repetitions, how they would want to sound good. And the Lord is saying, don't do that. That's what the heathen do. The heathen had their repetitions that they would say. When Elijah went before the 350, I think it's 450, of the false prophets of Baal, they were calling out to Baal, "Oh, Baal, hear us. Oh, Baal, hear us." There was a repetition there, calling to Baal. Well, don't do that, he says. Stay away from those big words. Don't worry about, make it simple. It's what one is to do. There's nothing wrong with a long prayer. You know, some individuals have a longer prayer than others. I'm talking about in the public sense, and that's fine. Just know why you're praying. Know you're praying on behalf of the congregation. And don't worry about the repetitions. And some people say sometimes the same thing pretty much over and over in their prayers, and that's not repetition if their heart's in it. But let's don't get caught up in our prayer life saying things that we don't really have meaning, don't know what's being said. Say things that come from the heart. The Lord's more interested in our heart than he is our tongue and what comes out of it. How are we saying it? What's the meaning behind it? Next week, we get into the Lord's Prayer. He's talking about prayer here, and then now he's going to begin to teach them about prayer. And we'll probably be a few weeks in the Lord's Prayer. There's a lot there to talk about. So he's telling them here about prayer, and now he's about to teach them more about the real meaning of prayer and what's to be done. So the Sermon on the Mount, it's a good. He got the people's attention. The people can see a difference. And that's how it ends. People looking at Christ and seeing, well, this man's different, much different than anything we've ever heard. All right, next week we'll start on the Lord's Prayer, probably verse 9. We'll get on a couple verses there.